our first reading from Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Sophie, every faith in the world is based on fabrication. That is the definition of faith. Acceptance of that which we imagine to be true, that which we cannot prove. Every religion describes God through metaphor, allegory, and exaggeration, from the early Egyptians through modern Sunday school. Metaphors are a way to help our minds process the unprocessable. The problems arise when we begin to believe literally in our own metaphors. Our second reading from Salman Rushdie, from his collection of stories, 2 years, 8 months, and 28 nights. In Salman Rushdie's words, this is a story from our past, from a time so remote that we argue sometimes about whether we should call it history or mythology. Some of us call it a fairy tale. But on this we agree that to tell a story about the past is to tell a story about the present. To recount a fantasy, a story of the imaginary, is also a way of recounting a tale of the actual. If this were not true, then the deed would be pointless. And we try in our daily lives to eschew pointlessness whenever possible. This is the question we ask ourselves as we explore and narrate our history. How did we get here from there? History, mythology, fairy tales. The stories I could have used to illustrate the topic today are numerous, or maybe innumerous. Just think of any mythological, any fanciful tale you can come up with. All the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, Disney movies, Marvel movies, holy texts such as the Christian Bible, Jewish Torah, Hindu Upanishads, Aesop's fables, oral folk tales, even stories passed down or told in our families of origin and our families today. There's actually no reason to stop there, right? I could keep going. A list of fanciful tales could span the library from fiction to mythology, spirituality to science fiction to mystery. The one thing that these stories have in common is that they are not facts, as historians or journalists try to capture. When I read a fairy tale about a tailor besting a giant, or when I watch a movie about a woman who can shoot ice from her fingers, I know that these events didn't actually happen. Just as when I read about Jesus healing a leper, or about a fox giving up trying to get grapes when they were out of reach, I know that these are not factual accounts of history. And I'm betting that you're all with me now. You got this. You got this. Fiction isn't fact. I mean, that's the definition, right? Fiction is not fact. So I'm not going to belabor that point. But the amazing part, the part that we sometimes miss, is that there is truth to be had in myths. Even in fiction and story and in fantasy and fairy tales. Because the reason that some of these tales hold so much power and they keep getting retold and remembered and re-retold and re-remembered is that they hold truth. Truth that isn't despite the fiction, but truth that is heightened by that fiction, by that mythology. And in ancient Greek, this is where the title of the sermon comes from. In ancient Greek, there were two words which spoke to the type of truth I'm talking about: mythos and logos. Mythos includes what we would call myths, stories about the fanciful, about the not real. And then logos is the logical, the factual data with evidence, with reason. Mythos as stories and fantasy, logos as fact and reality. But both hold truth. Both hold truth. In our culture and in our religion, in Unitarian Universalism, which is born of this culture, we tend to stress more logos for truth-telling. When we want facts, we want reason, we stress that logos. We want to know the data. We want to have the evidence. We want to back that up. And this is all fine and good. This is fine. But logos has some limitations. Logos cannot express all the truth. Sure, logos and facts are necessary. They're really necessary in creating airplanes, in creating vaccines, in much of mathematics. But there's a whole other aspect of the world in which logos fall short. Science tells me that I am born, that I live, and that I will die. But science says nothing about falling in love, about being heartbroken, or what it means to die. Logos has nothing to say about the meaning of life. Logos can express the contents of a warm cup of tea, but only mythos can express how drinking that tea makes me feel after a nice cool walk in the woods. Mythos is that language of truth that goes beyond facts, that goes beyond the logos. Some say that mythological thinking was the prehistoric way of thinking, that it only existed to explain what our ancestors could not explain through science and through modern problem solving. Mythos is something of the past, which has been left behind, right? Aesop's fables, religious texts, only existed to explain a world which was at the time unexplainable. And currently, we're in this modern world. We have facts everywhere, age of reason. We don't need the myths. Oh, not so fast there, scientists. Hold on. It was on purpose. It was on purpose I said mythos goes further. It goes beyond the truth of logos, because mythos isn't subservient to logos. Myths aren't subservient to facts. It's transcendent of it. There are truths that logos can never speak to, no matter how rational, how fact-based we are. I mentioned some stories earlier, so I'm going to look at them again. From the brave tailor, what does it feel like to achieve something you are proud of? How does that feeling of pride help you tackle a more difficult problem? I can try to explain that feeling, but the story does it more eloquently. The movie Frozen is not about people who actually lived. I'm sorry if that's upsetting to you. But the story tells us a truth. It shows us that an act of true love can save someone's life. An act of love can save that very person who is embodying love, who's embodying selflessness. Jesus might not have literally placed hands on people and healed them of physical ailments, but he brought calm. He brought peace to distraught people. These people were the uplifted, were healed, were loved. And a fox didn't truly try to get grapes and then change her mind because she couldn't reach them. And yet the tale speaks to all of us, and the feeling of changing our outlook or changing our expectations when something we desire is not attainable. Each of these stories holds a truth, holds multiple truths. Truths were at once deeper and also beyond the truths of facts and reason. This is religion at its finest and also at its most confusing. From Dan Brown again, every religion describes God through metaphor, through allegory, exaggeration, from the early Egyptians through modern Sunday school. Metaphors are a way to help our minds process the unprocessable. Mythological truth is a way to process the unprocessable, a way to think about those questions which facts cannot answer. But remember the problem there. Remember the problem. The problem arises when we begin to believe literally in our own metaphor. Difficulties arise when we take the myth as fact, as literal, when mythos and logos are conflated. It goes both ways, actually, this confusion, because difficulties also arise when logic is taken emotionally. I cannot explain my love for my children. I cannot explain that. I cannot explain my apprehension of death through diagrams and charts. Logical facts minimize my feelings, and although science can tell me some of why I feel what I feel, it falls drastically short in the entire truth. I also cannot explain the healing of a sick person through a story of miracles. Mythology misses the germs and the medicine. And although a story can tell me some of what it feels like to be healed, it also falls drastically short of the entire truth. The point is that we don't discount either type of truth, and we also don't try to equate them. The Bible is full of truth as mythos, with some logos sprinkled in. A nonfiction history book is full of logos, truth, fact, with some mythos sprinkled in, right? It is wise for us not to ignore one, not to ignore the other, and not to equate them. It can be really easy to throw out an entire story since, well, it was not true. And when we do that, we miss the truth that's held in that myth, the truth in fantasy. And it's especially important to listen to truths in mythos when looking at religious text, and even more so when speaking with someone about matters of faith. If I read the Upanishads or the Bible with only an interest in fact, I would miss the vast majority of the truths to be had therein. And if I conflate those truths with facts, I also miss the truths and I get confused about fact and fiction. And we're going to return a little bit specifically to Juneteenth, because it gives us some examples. We know that slavery did not end in Texas with the Emancipation Proclamation. We don't exactly know why, actually. From the Juneteenth.com website, they say, later attempts to explain this 2.5-year delay in the receipt of this important news have yielded several versions that have been handed down through the years. Often told is the story of a messenger who was murdered on his way to Texas with the news of freedom. Another is that the news was deliberately withheld by the enslavers to maintain the labor force on the plantations. And still another is that federal troops actually waited for the slave owners to reap the benefits of one last cotton harvest before going to Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. All of which, or none of these, could be true. Certainly, for some, President Lincoln's authority over the rebellious states was in question. Whatever the reason, conditions in Texas remained status quo, well beyond what was statutory. Each of these stories speaks to a deeper truth than the facts. Was a messenger murdered? Oh my gosh, look at the danger of challenging the norm and challenging those in power. Or maybe the information was withheld to help with labor. That's drastic, although not entirely unbelievable. Story about the value of money versus human life. I mean, we see that now. The lesson here is to be careful. To be careful that logos, that mere facts, do not tell the entire story. There are emotions, there are feelings, there are cultural norms, there are power structures, there are intentions, there are ambitions, many of which are missed when sticking to just the facts, ma'am. Let's think about a deep discussion about faith, a deep discussion about social justice issues, political concerns, especially those red button topics. If you think about those, it's often the disagreements are not just about facts. They're not only about truth, but they're also about the type of truth we're listening to. My faith in the goodness of humanity can't be dissuaded by facts. It can't. I see horrible things. I still believe in the goodness of humanity. Your belief in the divinity of all, an example, if you have that belief, can't be unproven by experimentation and reason. The whole evolution versus creation debate is a conflation of mythos and logos. One's mythos, one logos. Mythos tells me that there is a mystery in the creation of life. We can't explain this. We can't explain all of life. Logos tells that there's this ongoing changing of one creature into another. They're both true. Those are both truths. They're different sets of truth, and they don't conflict with each other unless you take the mystery to be the fact. In matters of faith, in matters of all things, when we talk with others, it's helpful to remember this distinction of mythos and logos. When someone is coming from a place of emotion, a place of feelings, responding with facts is less than helpful. We all know this. If you're really upset and someone comes to you with facts, it's like, that's not helpful. And just as responding to a logical argument of facts with emotion can be less than helpful. Arguing facts against emotions will never end well. And there is more from Salman Rushdie. On this we agree, that to tell a story about the past is to tell a story about the present. To recount a fantasy, a story of the imaginary, is also a way of recounting a tale of the actual. This is the question we ask ourselves as we explore and as we narrate our history. How did we get here from there? When we tell a story about the past, we are telling a story about the present. Not only is our telling shaped by our present understanding, but we also create the past. Yes, we do create the present and we do create the future, but we create the past. I'm thinking here of George Orwell's 1984 book. Famously, in his book, the ruling government party continues to change history, to rewrite books, and edit all written accounts. Whatever they want to be true is true, whether or not it sort of actually happened. What has actually happened? The tale is fiction. 1984 is fiction. But there exists a truth about the mutability of the past. The saying goes that history is written by the victor, right? History is written by the victor. Whoever has the power to write about what happened gets to say what happened. And those who come later only have that account from the victors to believe. The past does indeed seem editable. And I find that unsettling. I find it unsettling to say that the past can change, but I get it. I mean, look at how we view Thanksgiving or Columbus Day. Both holidays have come under scrutiny for whitewashing, both in a metaphorical and a racial sense, right? Whitewashing our history. So was Columbus a brave founder of a new land, or a heartless egoist committing genocide? Was the first Thanksgiving a beautiful coming together of two cultures in peace and harmony? Or was it an early foreboding of the litany of subjugation, oppression, and cruelty to follow? There may be a factual answer to both of these questions, but the histories we have are a mix of logos and mythos, of logic, of emotion, of fact and fiction. So maybe the past itself isn't mutable, but how we understand it and how we know it certainly is. How do we look at slavery? What are the stories we tell about our culture's owning and selling of human beings? How we tell stories, how we remember, changes and impacts our understandings and how we move forward into the world. We have power. We have power in this mythos of history, the power of telling stories about our past, telling stories about our present that morph from historical fact into semi-historical tales. We can't help but do it. We can't help but tell stories about what happened in both factual and fanciful ways. Who tells the story? What words are used? What is remembered? What's forgotten? By speaking, we create our past, we create our reality, and we create our future. The reason I picked the brave tailor this morning is the sort of meta-ness of it in its construction. Not only does it speak mythos to the truth of accomplishment and feeling brave, but if we look closer, the tailor tells a story himself, which then comes true. He wasn't especially brave at the beginning, but by the end, the tailor is ready to take on an unimaginable task of bravery. He told himself he was brave. He believed himself brave. Others believed him to be brave, and then he was brave. That's meta, yeah. And now I switch to our communal stories. Look at the differences between how gatherings are explained in our very recent history. You may have heard this before. The Black Lives Matter protests versus insurrection at the Capitol. People protesting, people rioting, mobs, thugs. The media and many politicians tended to talk about some gatherings in a positive lens and others in a negative lens, with people of color very often portrayed negatively. The words used in describing and description create a reality on their own. A group described as a mob of thugs will be remembered as a mob of thugs. A group described as patriotic protesters, we're working hard on that one, may be remembered as patriotic protesters. Thankfully, the media, politicians are beginning to see the power their words have, the power their mythos has, and see the slant with which they've been speaking. That's communal. Personally, this is true too. We all take part in creating reality through our words. Every single day, everything we do. If I keep telling someone that they are worthless, they will start to believe that. They will start to believe that they are worthless, they will act it, and they will embody that worthlessness. If, on the other hand, I continually tell someone that they are powerful, they are beautiful and strong and loved, then they will start to believe that they are powerful and beautiful and strong and loved, and they will act it, and they will embody that power, that beauty, that strength, and that love. What we do, what we say, helps create reality. Our power is in our storytelling about the world, about history, about the future. When we talk about each other, when we talk about ourselves, when we talk about what's happening in the world, we are using that powerful truth of mythos and the powerful act of creating truth. So what's the point? What's the point of all of this? I went all back and forth, mythos and logos. There are 2 points here. The point is twofold. First, listen to truth from both facts and myths. Don't miss out. Mythos often holds the truth more powerful and deeper than factual accounts. Don't discount mythology as lacking truth, and be open to hearing someone else's truth. Be very careful about conflating those two, mythos and logos, either way. And secondly, we tell stories, we create reality with our myths, with our talking. Our past, our present, and our future can all be changed. It can be changed through how we remember, how we construct the truths of myth and fact. So be careful what reality you are creating, and use your power of storytelling. Use your power of creation for good. Listen to both truths. Be careful what truth you create. Myths speak to a deeper and higher truth than facts. It is speaking to the truth of the soul. Hear that truth of the soul, and when you create truth of the soul, for you do so with love. Amen.